Hi, welcome everyone. We're so excited to bring you the highlights of the International Movement Disorder Society Congress that just happened in Philadelphia. I am Dr. Indu Subramanian. I'm based in Los Angeles, and my colleague,
Dr. Kathrin LaFaver. I'm a movement specialist in Saratoga Springs, New York. Just back from the meeting in Philadelphia, and I didn't go last year, so it was really, really nice to see everyone in person. And it'll be nice to have some time to kind of highlight some of the takeaways, maybe, and those who weren't able to go. Do you want to start? What was your favorite topics this year?
first session, first plenary, within the first 10 minutes of the Congress, we had Bas Blom talking about holistic care in early Parkinson's disease management. And he highlighted two of my papers, which was really exciting, really thinking about what it means to the patient, the person living with Parkinson's, to get this diagnosis, how to deliver the diagnosis with compassion and hope, which was, the theme of one of our papers. He brought in the concept of, really bespoke care to the person sitting in front of you, and brought in another paper of ours on women and gaps in care for women, which sort of set the tone for the meeting. Person matters. It should be patient-centered care. I think one of the themes of that session was also on lifestyle, which is really exciting to you and I, Kathrin, thinking about, exercise, diet. And he really thought about integrative medicine or holistic medicine, and talked a little bit about the history of complementary alternative medicines, and the fact that, there are things that are out there that are dangerous, that are very expensive to patients, that we really need to caution patients about, but also that there are things that are, tried and true in, I guess, Western medicine. But this lecture was called 50 Shades of Gray or something, take on that, and sort of this gray zone in which we may have things that we don't have great evidence base for, but that patients anecdotally feel better, and that we should be listening to the patient, trying to understand their experience, and perhaps then sort of taking some of that away and trying to study this area more. And I think that that's very exciting to me, because I think there are, ever increasing issues with getting funding for the types of, studies in this arena. A lot of history of, either Western traditional medicine with pills and surgeries and movement disorders, and really everything else is sort of snake oil, so to speak. And I think we're finally seeing sort of a marriage, which is sort of what our program is about, on, what are sort of the in-between sort of gray zones, and what can we take away. So that was really, I think, very exciting to see.
Absolutely. And I think in that same realm was also the lecture of Dr. Miyazaki on neuropalliative care for Parkinson's, or kind of coming on both ends, and, really not just focusing on the motor symptoms, but really the whole person, and really seeing how can we support people and their families living with this diagnosis and all the entire spectrum of a disease.
Let's put some slides up about the caregiver and caring about the caregiver, talking about really the end of life sort of time frame, and actually bringing out, I think, a very beautiful concept of preserving the identity of the patient. And I actually had asked her a question about how can we do this? How can we operationalize this in our clinics? I believe that some of the palliative care principles that Janice talks about can really be brought in from diagnosis, and sort of understanding who the person is, what brings them value and meaning, in life, purpose, and sort of preserving that identity, throughout, sort of their disease time course into, sort of their later years. And she mentioned, I think, a case study of a physician who got sick with Parkinson, and not being able to see patients had really changed their ability to, value themselves, and how to sort of incorporate new meaning to allow them to preserve their identity and their quality of life.
To learn from our palliative care colleagues, I want to shift the focus a little bit to the actual main theme of the Congress, which was artificial intelligence, or AI in the movement disorder clinic. And Maria Stemelu really highlighted that, and there were really many, many sessions on how AI is currently already used both for diagnostics of movement disorders, tracking of symptoms, right? There's all the different technology. And I did want to highlight two sessions in particular. So one was actually the Stanley Fund Lecture Award, which was granted to Dr. Marina de Koning-Thyssen from the Netherlands. She gave a wonderful lecture, kind of a bit of a historical context of, where we coming from, where we are coming from, where we're going. So her lectures was entitled Next Generation Phenotyping in Movement Disorders. And she just made a very good point that as much as advances can be really done with AI, and she's actually involved in a project, their clinicians kind of have a consortium to inform, to learn AI, to adopt algorithms to help with diagnosis. And especially her focus is hyperkinetic movement disorders, and really help us decide, well, what are we seeing myoclonus? Are we seeing chorea? But ultimately, the algorithms need to be still informed and trained by expert clinicians. And ultimately, at least at this point in 2024, the tools should really help to support us rather than sort of take the decision completely out of our hands. Because again, there's many subtleties in movement disorders. Another really highlight session of the Congress was the controversy session. So the kind of two different viewpoints are sort of pitted against each other. And one of the sessions was AI replace the clinician in making a movement disorder diagnosis. Dr. Ray Dorsey from University of Rochester gave the pro argument. Dr. Mahajan from University of Cincinnati argued that no, we are not quite there yet. And the audience response sided largely with him. Dr. Mahajan made many good arguments why there are so many different points that clinicians or humans bring to the table. And he made it very entertaining. So I highly recommend people to watch the actual lecture, and just want to close by a quote he gave. He left us by actually Dr. Bess Bloom, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he was saying AI may make healthcare a bit more efficient, and hopefully should allow clinicians to spend more time with patients and with their students, and allow us to dig deeper into what matters the most to people, right? So hopefully that'll come true, and then we're going to actually, get AI to do some of the labor-intensive work, but have actually more time to spend with patients and focus on the things we just talked about, right? So have the opportunity to meet people with empathy, and maybe a little bit less time pressure than we often currently do in our clinics.
I loved when Dr. Mahajan had said, well, if you were getting, a diagnosis as, sort of weighty as Parkinson, would you want that to be given to you by a robot or some sort of computer or somebody using that sort of thing? You would really want to know, with clarity what you're dealing with, and have no issues with sort of questions, be able to understand, who you're getting this diagnosis from and connect with them. And if we wouldn't want this for ourselves or our family members, then we should be very careful about, treating the masses, using this type of technology, especially in sort of such a critical time frame as giving the diagnosis. So in the end, the conclusions were that we matter, the patient matters, and our, rapport and connection with the patient and their family is really at the core of what we do and why we do this.
Very well said. Another, I think, big topic, a real focus on environmental risks and neurodegeneration. So connecting the dangers of air pollution, climate warming, even on the rise in neurodegenerative diseoses. Indu, what was your take from that?
I was really excited to see this in the plenary because I think we haven't had this type of content before. I think, two things really struck me. I think the climate change issues are something that I've been interested in, and we've actually had an interview on this program about that. And I think it really talks about how at risk our patients are living with Parkinson's, and how we are ill-equipped to deal with the rising sort of climate issues, and also just talking about the fact that these measures that might be sort of subtly happening in the background are really influencing the total risks of populations to get various types of diseases, including neurodegenerative and Parkinson's. Anything we can do to sort of target this, as a global problem, it will hopefully help, Parkinson pandemic, as we talked about. Additionally, I think, the last speaker, I think in that session had talked a little bit about sort of the contribution to, for example, Alzheimer's disease and all these different pieces that might be modifiable. And I think if we thought about that same sort of modifiability of the risk of Parkinson's, and take, control of some of the things that we have in our own armamentarium, including, certain uses of chemicals that are still being used throughout the world, I think we may be able to at least chip away at some of the modifiability. We may not be able to change genes and risk, which is obviously a big component, but these other things, when you add them together and you look at sort of the sum total of what we can modify, and then if you add on, those types of things that we're talking about, which include lifestyle measures of trying to be proactive to help populations at risk, I think we're sort of in a time frame where we may actually be able to really talk about, secondary and possibly even primary prevention of this disease in our lifetime. But we're not going to be able to do this unless we really work together with policymakers. And I think Ray Dorsey and Bas Blom both stood up at the end of that session and said, we as a society should really take a very strong stance against some of these chemicals. And we should, be really, very clear about our messaging. And I think hopefully we'll see some sort of response from the society moving forward. For Parkinson's disease doctors, I think we're sort of being more, acting as advocates, which I'm really excited to see, not just passive sort of recipients of knowledge at this sort of forum and then, going back to our clinics and doing the same old thing.
Yeah, as part of that same plenary was also a session on infection and Parkinson's. And one of the surprising things for me was that there is a possibility that we are going to see an increase in Parkinson's related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think there was initially a lot of concern about that and kind of correlation with the Spanish flu and so on. And I personally was not aware that this is still so much of the radar. And Dr. Smain highlighted in that session that there might be a delay of like 5 to 7 years until we really see these numbers, because it might be more like a multiple hit theory and not sort of a single cause why this will bring on Parkinson's. So I think there's more to come and then more to be studied, but it was definitely a high yield session.
Also some great content on functional neurologic disorders. I was excited to see that you presented on something, right, Kathrin?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So really nice session with David Perez from MGH in Boston, Dr. Mark Edwards, and Teresa Seranova as speakers, entitled Current Perspectives on Functional Movement Disorders. Dr. Seranova was really focusing her session on how to build a service for functional movement disorders. So we have learned a lot about some of the more underlying pathophysiology and some of the treatment advances over the last decade. But I think there's really a big gap still in actually bringing these services to people, right? And so she made a very practical session on how to actually start an FMD service and highlighted several other resources for people to check out. So I think that's really a high yield talk for people to watch, especially if you are working in an area there is currently no easy treatment avenues for people with FMD. And yes, I had the pleasure of also sharing the podium with Dr. Tan from Malaysia on another communication topic. So we're asked to speak about how to break the news in movement disorders and how to communicate a difficult diagnosis with a patient and their family. So I talked about giving a diagnosis of FMD, and Dr. Tan spoke about giving a diagnosis of atypical Parkinsonism, and she made some really wonderful points. And again, interestingly, bringing in concepts from the palliative world, right, on how to addressing patients' emotion and really understanding the goals, what is important for a patient and how to really build connections and avoid certain pitfalls. So
I actually got to present on a topic about disparities in care for various populations. Talked about gaps in care for women, both on the management and research side. There was a talk about genetics and involving global representation in genetics. And then the final speaker was Fei Gao, who will be part of the hosting crew in Hawaii, talking about delivering care in limited resourced environments, and really talked a little bit actually about the history of Hawaii and sort of some of the indigenous kind of populations there, and folks have come into different places in the world and changed the dynamic of healthcare and what health is to populations. And so it was a really interesting session. Highly urge you to watch that as well.
That's wonderful. Gosh, it was such a rich Congress and so many things to learn, and it's impossible to cover them all. One thing I did want to make sure we mention is some of the educational offerings of the MDS, and I know you're involved with some of them as well. I had an interesting conversation with Dr. Shilpa Chitnis, who's in charge of the lead programs of the Leadership Academy of the MDS, and that's specifically geared towards younger members who want to develop their leadership skills. And they have run this program for the past 8 years and really made a big change this year to make it accessible for larger number of people. So there's now a virtual component that they call the basic LEAP, and then the more advanced LEAP is going to be offered in person prior to future MDS congresses. But definitely a good opportunity for people to check that out. Also, many special interest groups meetings that happen, such as the Women Movement Disorder Reception. There's a expansion of the educational roadmap that BMDS has been offering. And also more online lectures available for people to watch on leadership topics. So MDS really shows us it's not just about the annual meeting. We really have opportunities to connect and then learn really throughout the year.
I was involved with a fun networking program for the young members. We were standing at tables and talking about, my subject was outreach. Different people had talks about, balance in work life, things like that. So it was a very well attended reception. So highly urge everyone out there who has an interest in movement disorders to get involved. There's also an increasing offering, for example, with allied health professionals. And so we really just have a shortage of providers who are taking care of these diseases that we are passionate about. And so we really just need to increase our reach and expand sort of education and empowerment to help people living with, these various disorders. So it was great to see you there, Kathrin, after some gap in time, and many of these meetings also foster friendships and collaborations that last a lifetime.
MDS is doing a great job getting people together, getting people talking. So I think that was a wrap. And really, again, urge everyone to check out virtual recorded sessions that are going to be available and hopefully, keep learning. Thanks so much.